Hi, this is Ellen Carlson, and this week I'm presenting on numeric and associative arrays. So what is an array? I'm sure most of you have probably worked with them before, but essentially an array is a special variable that allows you to store multiple values in that one single array. So for example, suppose you needed to store 100 different numbers. Instead of defining 100 variables, one for each number, you could instead define a single array of a length of 100 and store all those numbers. Arrays are created in PHP using the array function. So here in this little example, you can see that I have an array called subjects, and then it calls the array function, and then the values we want to store are inside the parentheses. So we're storing 3 different subjects. In PHP, there are 3 types of arrays. So the first is numeric or indexed, and those are arrays with a numeric index. So meaning the first index would start at 0 and increment like 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Associative is similar, but instead of having a numbered index, you have strings, and so they're named keys. And then multidimensional are arrays that contain one or more arrays. So with numeric arrays, like I said, they're using numbers, and they are stored and accessed in a linear fashion. Like I said, starts at 0, and then would increment. So in these examples, you'd be, 0, 1, 2. So there's 2 different ways to create indexed arrays. So first, which is I think probably more popular, is to automatically assign the index. And so in that first example, you can see we have an array called cars, and then we call the array function. And here we're not specifically saying what index we want to go with which car, but it's automatically assigned. So Volvo we know will be 0, BMW will be 1, and Toyota will be 2, but we're not specifying that. Whereas in example 2, you can see that it's specific, and we're manually assigning, I want 0 to be Volvo, 1 to be BMW, and so on. So with associative arrays, like I said, you're using named keys, and they're strings. So these keys are user defined. There's also 2 ways to create an associative array. First using like the arrows, and then the others using like the square brackets and equal signs. So in these specific examples, we have the 2 required parameters. You have to have a key and you have to have the value. In these examples, the key is the employee name, and the value is the salary associated with those employees. And it, I feel like, provides a little bit of context and useful information, because you don't just have, this number by itself. It has more meaning because now it's associated with a specific employee. So how do you use arrays? I mean, there's so many different ways, but one basic example I thought of is that, well, in our PHP Motors project, we have an inventory of cars. Well, instead of having a different variable for each car, you could have one array where you're storing all those cars, and then we can access an individual by referring to that car's index. So let me switch over to Visual Studio. So here you can see I have an array called cars, and then we call the array function, and then I have 6 different cars listed inside of these parentheses. And so if I open the browser, might be a little slow, you can see that it is printing out my 6 cars that I included. And that's because I have a for loop down here just to print it out to the screen, but we'll talk about that a little later. So that's a very simple thing, but you could do a lot with it. One example is we could sort the cars alphabetically. So now when we open it, you can see that it's alphabetical, by the first word. So with associative arrays, something I thought of that would make a lot of sense for you guys is, what if we wanted to store information regarding like a specific user? Instead of having a variable for like first name, last name, age, we could store all that user's information in one single array, or whatever information that you wanted to store. So in this case, I have an array called user, and then array function, And then here you can see the key is first name, and I got my arrow pointing to the value of Matt. And again, here's the key of last name, value Carlson, key age, value 28. And it's just going to print out a simple statement of Matt is 28 years old. So those are fairly simple examples, but there's so much you can do with arrays. Like I said, it makes it really easy to store many values under a single variable. And that's so useful, especially because we can loop through the arrays really easily with a for each loops. This can make a variety of things easier, but especially like printing an array to a screen like you saw in my cars example. But you can also use that to find things. PHP also includes many PHP array functions that you can use to access and manipulate arrays. So here's just a list that you can view, but yeah, there's so much you can do with them. And you can also sort arrays. So you saw a little bit of that in my example, but you can sort ascending, descending, you can sort according to the value, according to the key. There's just a lot you can do with arrays, and I think that they're pretty powerful. And if you want to learn more about them from some good sources, I've provided some links to W3 School's php.net and Tutorials Point, and I think they're really helpful. But hopefully this little overview of arrays was useful, and I wish you luck in this class.